So when it comes to looking at, stable haze and different process points and hop varieties that you can use that have more or less of impact in that area, again, I have to look at work done from the team at Omega Yeast that's looked at different hop varieties that are being dry hopped with. What was the level of actual tested measure of basically turbidity in these beers? Certain hop varieties that just increased the level of haze. And they found, Sabro, Simcoe, Citra, the three that really pushed it in the haze value, that really hazy category. And again, that's, dry hopping post or late into fermentation to get those results. Yeast strain also has a big impact on haze. We get questions every once in a while from other breweries trying, my beer's dropping clear, what am I doing wrong? And sometimes I just smell like, we sometimes can't get our beers to be clear when we're doing, like a West Coast IPA, for example. We try to do everything we can to clear it up. And I think the yeast selection is big in this area. For example, we've done one beer where we co-pitched London Ale 3 with USO 5, and that was one of our clear beers. And once again, Omega has done some research into this, and they've really found that there's, certain yeast strains that are haze positive, some are haze neutral, and some are, haze negative. And not surprisingly, like high on the list is London Ale 3. It's just a strain that, especially when combined with dry hopping in general, but especially hops that are, throw a little more haze, produces that cloudy look that I think a lot of brewers and customers actually are looking for. Surprising on that list to me was the Conan strain. That was more of a haze neutral strain, which doesn't mean you can't make hazy beers from it, but maybe that means you need to use some of those hops that are a little better at promoting haze. It wasn't studied, but in our experience, Galaxy and Nelson are actually two other hops that are very good at just creating more of a stable haze in beers. Dry hop amount can have an impact too. Really, anything over like 2 pounds a barrel is 3 or 4 pounds a barrel is really that like max sort of haze level. And this was studied in the same paper that looked at different hop varieties, but they found that anything in that 4 pounds a barrel range just took you into that haze territory that's very hazy. And then 2 pounds per barrel is still creating quite a bit of haze, but then a little bit less than that. It just, the more you're dry hopping, the higher the haze values. And so really, piecing this all together, it's you can use certain hops to throw more haze, and then maybe you want to consider yeast strain that's a little more haze neutral than maybe dry hopping with Galaxy or Sabro or Citra, something like that, to counteract the natural haze that you're going to get from that yeast strain. But I think in general, if you're building a recipe that's got a decent amount of grist obviously plays an important role in haze as well. We're looking at mostly 2-rower pills, and then I like to add a decent amount of chip malt into the beers that kind of helps with head retention. And then I think oats and malted wheat are really the big ones in a hazy IPA. 10 to 15% malted wheat, I think, goes a long ways in producing a good amount of stable haze, especially if you are using some of these haze positive yeast strains. Haze is really a big matrix of different things that work off each other that gives you that end haze result. But dextrins can have a minor impact on haze, so this is even more true in higher ABV beers. And so, a hazy IPA, I think you need a little bit of that sweetness in there to really kind of balance the heavy dry hopping. And for us, most of our IPAs and double IPAs are finishing above like 10-20. Or right around that area, and that's just enough sweetness to kind of balance just the big vegetal impact you're getting from hops, just trying to create that balance. But just a side impact of the dextrins might be a little bit more of that haze stability that a lot of brewers are after. I think you'll notice that a lot of hazy IPAs, what makes them partly so great is the mouthfeel. They're just super soft. They're pretty viscous too. I mean, almost, I like to say more like a stout sort of mouthfeel than what you're typically used to in like a West Coast IPA, which is just an inviting kind of characteristic to a beer. And it's interesting that, some of the recent research that's tested some, hazy IPAs has found that maybe it's the viscosity of these beers is actually helping to retain some of these compounds that are otherwise more volatile. So looking at something like myrcene, you're going to have higher amounts in a hazy IPA than you would like a West Coast IPA. And it's just that viscous nature is maybe holding more of these into solution, which is another kind of reason why we, going back to the colder dry hop temperatures and what we can do to sort of reduce those compounds we don't want in high amounts. The research can be beneficial in that area. I think it's also interesting to me if you have a hazy IPA that's just like totally turbid and it looks like, you can't see anything through it. I mean, it's just very viscous, super turbid. Generally, to me, those are the ones that are some of the harsher ones to actually to taste. And it's probably in part just because it's so viscous, it's holding a lot of those compounds in. And so I think there's, balance is an easy word to keep using, but I think that's important to consider. It's not, just trying to create a beer that's super, super hazy. It's really trying to use the haze as a factor to build the recipe to create something that's complex, but it's still balanced, and you're really trying to push the aspects from hops that you're after and utilizing the science to try to get what you want from the hops and keep out what you don't. So haze, I think it is a sort of a carrying agent to some flavor, but it's also something that you have to look closely at to create a beer that's drinkable. But I think that's important too.